on the 0 hour. My next guest, well, how should we put this? Received a lot of publicity recently when he was arrested and accused of the crime of statue defacement or defacement of public property, which in and of itself is, first of all, he can't comment on the incidents in question. Personal editorial comment before we begin. That is normally, regardless of guilt or innocence of any party, considered a minor crime or incident. This one received enormous publicity, probably because he is an anti-fascist activist, which is a movement being targeted now from the president on down. So while he can't talk about, as I say, about the incidents in question, he can certainly talk about the movement and perhaps some other things around this arrest as well. So without any further ado, Jason Charter, anti-fascist activist and campaign worker, welcome to the 0 hour.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And, I'll start with this. I live not far from you, same general neighborhood. And one day, people started saying, there's a bulletin board where people usually, talk about where to find, a good tailor or something. And all of a sudden I started getting these messages on it with pictures. What's with the military equipment in our neighborhood? What's with these masked and uniformed soldier types? What's going on here? And then the next thing I heard, there was an arrest, and it was you. So, people were saying on the bulletin board, like, is the military invading our, I won't name where it is, but is the military invading our neighborhood and so on? So the actual experience of being arrested, I'm going to guess, must have been kind of insane.
If I haven't lived the life that I've lived, I would say it would have been the most traumatic experience of my life. Unfortunately, I was in Charlottesville when James Fields decided to drive his car through a crowd of protesters and attempted to murder us. But it was definitely up there on the level of fear, anxiety. And to be honest, if I wasn't white, I probably wouldn't have made it out of there alive. I'm a gun owner. And if they decided to do a no-knock raid, which means not knocking and just banging in the door, I would assume that would have been a home invader, and that could have potentially put me in harm's way and potentially could have had me killed because the police chose to do this militaristic style raid. The second I opened the door, there were guns in my face. I can't even count how many. They forced me to get on the floor, demanding it that or they'll kill me. Made me crawl, even though I'm handicapped. I have sciatica nerve damage from activism, from being beat up by police and fascists. And I had to crawl on my hands and knees out the door into my hallway, where they arrested me, treated me less than human, said that I was faking my injuries when I begged them to help me to get up on my feet because they were demanding for me to get up on my feet after they put the cuffs on. And the whole incident was just dehumanizing. And I think that was the whole point. They robbed me of a lot of my possessions. And when I came back to my house, it was unrecognizable. It didn't look like my home anymore. It looked like someone took a tornado and just destroyed it. And when I found out what they have taken and how much they have taken, it was definitely a big blow to my morale at the time, because I had no way to communicate with anyone in the outside world. They took away all my modes of communication via computers or any type of electronic device.
This is the second time in the last few weeks that I've talked to people who, another was one of our regular guests, Max Blumenthal, the journalist, who have been arrested for on suspicion of nonviolent crimes, and yet treated as if they were, desperados and serial killers or whatever, and with this extraordinary level of violence, of aggression, and I'm curious your thoughts. It seems to me that one of the purposes, I mean, even setting aside the issues of the arrests themselves, the charges themselves, legitimacy or lack of them, it seems to me that the intent is to intimidate people for expressing certain points of view. That's my opinion, but what's yours?
I completely agree with you, and I would agree with Max. Max and I were actually involved. I was actually involved with the Venezuelan embassy protests last
Mm-hmm.
year, and I had the privilege of meeting Max there. And I would say I would completely agree with you. These arrests are meant to intimidate people like me, who are the loudest people in the room, to not go back out and continue doing protests, continue expressing our First Amendment rights, and continue expressing our right to try to change this government, to make it better for everybody. Because my goal in life is to make it so that my Black, Brown, and Indigenous friends can have the same privileges that I experience as a white man in the United States.
So let's talk about that for a second. And again, we're talking with Jason Charter, activist. Um, let's talk about that for a second. The name that's been used both by the people orchestrating your arrest and others is Antifa or anti-fascist activist. Do you embrace that label, Antifa or anti-fascist?
So I said something at my press conference, and I'd love to repeat it right now. The statement "ringleader of Antifa" is as absurd as it is false. If you take 15 minutes online and go to Wikipedia, you can find out this easy to learn information that anti-fascism, or Antifa, as the right loves to call it, to create this big boogeyman, simply means to be against fascism. Anyone who is against fascism, that's Hitler, that's Mussolini, it's all these, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, all these people and their ideologies. If you're against that, then you're against fascism. So therefore, every American, whether you're right or left, should be anti-fascist. My grandfather fought in World War II, and that was a anti-fascist war. And America, I feel that was the last time we were on the right side of a war. But I also want to say that we organize horizontally. Anti-fascists don't organize with a hierarchy. Most organizers are anarchists. They don't believe in having a hierarchy, so everything's organized at a horizontal level. So how could someone be a leader in a organizing sphere like that? And on top of that, there are groups that sometimes call themselves anti-fascists, but there isn't a cabal of anti-fascist organizations. There is no network. We don't have chapters in every city. It's just groups of people who are like-minded coming together to fight oppression.
And you may or may not know this, but before the Second World War, a lot of leftists in this country went to fight for Spain as volunteers, which I'm sure you know, and but were accused of subversion. And the term that was used for them later was prematurely anti-fascist. I mean, the irony here, I think, is that increasing numbers of the American people actually agree with a lot of the aims that are being, what's the word, stigmatized by the right. They actually agree that, idealizing slave holders or the people who fought for the Southern insurrection is probably not a great thing. I think that that's probably a commonly held opinion. I think probably even a lot of the ultra conservatives would say you shouldn't lock somebody up for having views that are popular. So really, there's a whole propaganda campaign going on around this, isn't there?
Yeah, I believe the president and the entire GOP is putting out this narrative that Antifa is the boogeyman leading these riots that they call these protests that they love to call riots.
Right.
And majority of these protests are what what people would like to say, call, I guess, peaceful. I don't like to make that distinction between a good protester and a bad protester, and that's the narrative that's being framed right now. Is, oh no, those are the bad protesters. We're not, we want them off the streets. We don't want you off the streets. It's trying to create this division in the movement, so that folks who are anti-fascist and might choose to take action in a way that's unorthodox, it ends up getting them stigmatized from the rest of the group. And it's this great orchestrated campaign by the DHS and all its subsidiary groups and the president and the administration itself.
It must be, Jason Charter, it must be surrealistic. I mean, leaving aside the trauma of the arrest itself, it must be surrealistic to all of a sudden be treated by the right as a public face of, this supposedly terrifying threat of people opposing fascism. It must be a very strange experience to be talked about by, Tucker Carlson, or for all I know, the president or whomever, to be a sort of relatively private figure one day, and then this massive target the next day. What has it been like?
It's not the first time I've been in the limelight. Back in 2017, I was part of a group of a few people who handed out Russian flags with Trump's name on them at CPAC. That ended up garnering a lot of attention. And honestly, I'm glad I did that, because it prepared me for the death threats, for the hate mail, for all the things that I never expected to come out of just expressing my mind in a way that's sometimes creative, like with light projections, or handing out Russian flags with Trump's name on them, or standing in the streets in between protesters who are Black and cops, to ensure that those cops don't hit the protesters. I guess it is surreal. It's definitely something that I never expected to happen. I didn't expect to live in this world. I didn't expect to live in a world where, the president of the United States would come after a 25-year-old unemployed cripple. And that's who he's coming after in this case. And he's doing it on purpose. This is a organized strategy to make it look like white people like me are leading a movement that's actually being led by Black, brown, and indigenous youth across this nation, who are just afraid to become the next Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, or any of the other Black, brown lives that have been lost through police brutality, white supremacy, and systematic oppression.
Well, that's actually a great point, Jason Charter, that from a propaganda point of view, it makes it much easier for them to find a white scapegoat or scapegoats, so they don't appear to be doing what they're actually doing, which is suppressing a movement of Black and brown people. I hadn't really thought about that. How's your, and then I'll ask you one last political question after this, but has this been rough on your family? Or are they doing okay? Or
I wish I could say was easy on them, but it hasn't been. My family and I have received death threats. I received at least one death threat a day. After I did my press conference, I ended up receiving a dozen death threats that day. The day of my arrest, dozens of death threats, and having my Second Amendment rights taken away from me during the trial definitely puts me in a position where someone can come and kill me. And that's something I have to think about every single time I walk out of my house. My family is in fear too, because they have been targeted by the far right. And it's something that keeps me up at night. It really does.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I wish there was something that I could do to ease that fear, but unfortunately, there's nothing I can really do if some crazy person wants to come and kill me. If they're fully intent on doing it, there's nothing stopping them right now, and that's something that's scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. So my last question for you, if you're comfortable answering it, is I know you can't talk about what you're accused of doing, but what do you think the responsibility of citizens is when confronted with a statue or a plaque or something else that glorifies, let's say, someone who fought violently on behalf of protecting and expanding slavery, something like that, or someone who kept other human beings in bondage and bought and sold them as if they were property. Do you think citizens have a responsibility in that situation when confronted with something like that?
I think we need to take historical relativism into effect. There's this big push. I don't know, for folks who don't know what historical relativism means. It means to assess how someone's actions were done in that time period. I disagree with the assumption that due to historical relativism, we should keep these statues out in the public. I think these statues and monuments, plaques, and any like Confederate flags, any of these things, they belong in museums. The same place Nazi memorabilia is. It's in museums. It's actually illegal to have World War II Nazi era memorabilia in some countries. And that's where I think these things belong. They belong in museums. They don't belong on our streets. They don't belong in our parks. They sure as hell don't belong in front of our courthouses and our police stations. They belong in a museum and given historical context when displayed, so that folks can be like, okay, let's first say there's a statue of Thomas Jefferson that was taken down. I don't know if there has been. I don't know if there will be. But let's say there was one taken down. Taking that and maybe moving that statue into a museum and then explaining Jefferson's history of abuse of his slaves and how many slaves he owned at the time, why he did things the way he did, how he owned a plantation. I think those things need to be displayed right next to the statue so folks can get the relevance and what actually this person did.
Oh, well, that makes absolute sense to me. So thanks for that. And Jason Charter, anti-fascist activist, target of an arrest and other campaigns. Good luck with all of this. I know it's tough. Hang in there. And thanks for coming on the program.
No problem. Anytime.
You got it. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is Zero Hour.